Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and today I'm going to talk to you about the books I read in 2018 that came out in 2018. So I have a total of 10 books that I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to talk about in the order that I read them. So without any further ado, I'm just going to start with the first book, and that is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This book was probably my first disappointment of this year. Basically, it's a story about a girl and her mother who kind of travel all the time and never settle in one place because bad luck tends to hunt them. And the girl also has a grandmother who writes like a lot of stories that are called Tales of the Hinterland, which are like creepy fairy tales kinda. And the grandmother suddenly dies, and then, I don't know, the stories kind of come to life and come to hunt her, and they take her mother away to the hinterland. It's kind of all over the place, but the premise kind of excites me, and I was really excited reading this book. I actually bought it, and unfortunately, since I didn't like it, I already gave it away, so I don't have a physical copy right now. But yeah, it wasn't my cup of tea. I've heard some mixed reviews about this. I heard people who actually love it, and I also heard people who don't love it and are like me in that sense. So I mean, I'm not gonna tell you not to read this book, because for all I know it could be something you really enjoy, but for me it was a bit too much all over the place, and half of the time I just didn't know what was happening. The part that I actually really loved about this book was the Tales of the Hinterland itself. We have a few portions of the book that's actually explaining and telling the stories, and I kind of wish there was a book just about the Tales of the Hinterland, because I would so read that. So yeah, in the end I just had to give this 2 stars. If you want to see a more in-depth review, I have a Goodreads review on my Goodreads page, so you are free to check that out. But yeah, I'm really sad I didn't like it, but what can you do? The second book that I read in 2018, that came out in 2018, was Jane Seymour, The Haunted Queen by Alison Weir. I gave this book 3 stars on Goodreads. So I mean, I liked it, I didn't love it. This book is actually a series about the 6 queens of Henry VIII. I read the first book about Queen Catherine of Aragon, and then I read the second book of Queen Anne Boleyn. I actually really liked those 2 books. I did enjoy the third one too, but to be honest, I always kind of liked the first 2 queens more than the rest of the queens. And I mean, Jane Seymour isn't really the most interesting person, I think, to write about, but it was fun, it was nice. I really like being in that world at courts with all the pretty dresses and stuff, and with the intrigue, and that's really my cup of tea, so I enjoyed this book. I'm not sure if I'm gonna read the other books that are gonna come out, I think, about the 4th, 5th and 6th wife of Henry VIII. I'm just gonna wait and see what the reviews say, I guess. The third book I read was To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. I gave this book 4 stars, and yeah, I actually really liked it. It's basically the story about a mermaid, but she's actually called a siren, and they are kind of evil monsters, and they have to kill humans and rip out their hearts. And we basically follow one of those sirens who has to take out the heart of a prince, but then of course she kind of falls in love with the prince, and what are you gonna do? It was a pretty basic story, but I enjoyed it nevertheless. I also kind of liked the characters of both the siren and the prince. There were also a few side characters that I really enjoyed and had good personalities and were well developed characters. There was also a lot of action in this book. I also kind of liked it that it was a standalone book. I mean, it was a nice story, an entertaining story, and yeah, that's why I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read was Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. I gave this one 3 stars on Goodreads. This is also a book that I feel has been talked about a lot. You also have a lot of people who love this book. I wasn't really one of them. I really liked the concept. It's kind of the story about a group of young people who are trapped in a time loop, and they kind of have to figure out a murder that happened to one of their friends like months or years before. So I mean, that's really interesting to me. I was really excited to read it, but I thought the book was rather slow. I also didn't really get everything. I still don't really get the ending. I mean, they kind of have to vote on who gets out of the time loop and who lives, but I never really figured out who they voted for, and I don't know. I just don't get it. If you are someone who read this book and got the ending, please explain it to me in the comments, because maybe that's the reason why I didn't like this book. But there is another book with a similar concept with time loops that I actually enjoyed a lot more, and which I'm gonna get to later in this video. But before that, I have the next book I read in 2018, that came out in 2018, I think, and that is Circe by Madeline Miller. I already talked about this book in my 5-star reads of 2018, so obviously I gave this one 5 stars on Goodreads. Absolutely love this book. We follow Circe, who is a witch, and she is actually a daughter of a god, but because she is a witch, she gets banished to an island where she is isolated, but still there are a lot of people coming on her island throughout the years, and we see her interact with them. And I mean, Circe is just such a good character, such a complex character. I really liked her a lot, and I enjoyed this book so much. I cannot recommend this book enough to anyone who hasn't read it yet. I am really excited to read more of Madeline Miller's books, and yeah, that's kind of all I've got to say about this book. Then the 6th book I read in 2018, that came out in 2018, was Fox by Christina Dalcher. I gave this book 3 stars. I actually read this book together with my book club. I really wanted to read this book because it's a book about how the women in America only get to say 100 words a day, I think it was. And they have like a wristband that counts the words that they say, and basically they are being silenced. And through the book, it's a lot more than just the words. It's really about women going back to the kitchen and doing what women do, and men taking charge and everything. But I mean, that's a really interesting concept. It's also something kind of realistic. I mean, it could happen. It's not fantasy or anything. It's kind of futuristic, I guess, but it's something that really makes you think. But unfortunately, the book itself kind of disappointed me. Although I loved the concept and the idea, I don't really feel like it's necessarily a well worked out book. And to be honest, I kind of wish there were like 2 or 3 books of it, because it felt a bit cramped in the book. It also went so fast because it's just one book, but we have to deal with having this new kind of system where women cannot speak more than 100 words a day. We also have this main protagonist that we follow, who is a woman but who is very educated and is like a brain scientist. Then we also have her working for the government. Then we have overthrowing of the government, all those things. I mean, they're all just crammed in one book, and that for me felt like I couldn't get into it enough. I mean, if it would have been one book about explaining how the society worked with women and their wristbands and not being able to say anything, and then another book about women getting resistant about it and making a resistance, and I don't know, it just, for me, I kind of liked the concept so much that I kind of wanted more about it. I wanted to know more about it. But still, it was a decent read, and I mean, I still kind of recommend it if you like the concept and you like that story. But I kind of think I was expecting too much of it, and it kind of let me down. The next book I read in 2018, that came out in 2018, is KongoKorset by Herlinde Leyssens. I'm not going to talk too much about this book. I gave this one 4 stars on Goodreads. I really enjoyed it. It's the real story about the first woman who ever crossed Congo. I did a review on this book. I'll link it somewhere on the screen. But yeah, this is a Flemish book, so I know for all the English-speaking people out there, you cannot read it. I don't know if it will ever get translated, but for all the Flemish or Dutch-speaking readers out there, I really recommend this book. The next book that I read in 2018 that I absolutely loved and I just keep raving about is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I've already talked about this in one of my previous videos, and I think it was the November wrap-up. Similar as the Neverworld Wake, it has a time loop element in it, and the guy who is stuck in the time loop has to figure out who murdered Evelyn Hardcastle. But for me personally, this is so much better worked out. This is a book that I just couldn't put down because you have a lot of plot twist happening, and I mean, I already said all of this in my previous videos, but still, I mean, read this book. Please read this book. I really adore this book, so naturally I gave this one 5 stars on Goodreads, and yeah, I loved it. The next book that I read was Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Ngan. As I said in my December wrap-up, I gave this book 4 stars. I was really surprised by this book. In this book we follow a young woman who is being captured and brought to the palace, where she has to learn how to be a courtesan and learn how to seduce men and have sex. This book has a lot of Asian, Chinese, Japanese elements in it. It's very atmospherically told. I actually really loved that part. Also, I liked the characters, the different women we get to meet. And I also thought the fantasy element was really interesting because we have different casts, and we have like the human cast, which is the protagonist that we follow. Then you have like a cast that exists of monsters, they call them, but it's like human people, but they look like animals, so I can't really picture it in my head, but that's just the way it is. They're human, they can talk, they can walk, but they have like the form of a panther or a cat or a bull or something. And then you also have a cast that's like in between. You have humans with certain animalistic qualities to them, like cat ears or a tail or something. And I mean, that is just really interesting, and I gave this book 4 stars on Goodreads. And then the last book I read in 2018 that came out in 2018 is The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This was a big disappointment for me. I already talked about it in my December wrap-up video, so if you want to know about it, please just check that video. But basically it is the true story of a young man who is captured and brought to Auschwitz. And there he is the tattooist, and he has to tattoo the numbers on his fellow prisoners' arms. And he uses his influence that he has because of this job to take care of other people and give them food and stuff. Is a story that I think should be told, but unfortunately I did not like the writing style. It's made the story pretty boring for me, and that's why I only gave this book 2 stars on Goodreads. So that were all the books that I read in 2018 that came out in 2018. I hope you liked this pretty long video, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Bye!